computer. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for all those attending. My name is Stephen Lewis. I have with us today Lori Torrini, who I'm very excited to have on the channel. As I was telling you, there's been episodes where she was the only guest in attendance, so I'm happy to have her on as an interview subject today. We're going to be discussing a paper Lori recently wrote for the IAABC Journal. That stands for the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. The IAABC Foundation is a registered 501c3 charitable organization. This is a peer-reviewed paper on snake enrichment. And Lori is someone that I try and talk to as often as possible. So I did that. I follow her YouTube channel under the same name and her Patreon channel at Behavior Education. And I know she is full-time with her animal sanctuary as well, the Spirit Keeper Equine and Animal Sanctuary. Did I get that right, Lori?
It started out as Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary, but we got so many other species that started getting surrendered to us that we also do business as Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary.
Excellent. And I know you've studied the behavior of snakes in depth, but this didn't start with snakes. You've been studying animal behavior for a very long time now. So very, very, very happy to have you on. Thank you very much. That being started, let's jump in. So we're here to discuss enrichment for snakes. So the very first thing I wanted to do, Lori, is just ask you flat out, what is enrichment?
That's the best question to start with, because you hear that word thrown around all the time, and depending on the organization that is using it and the dictionary that you look it up in, it has different meanings. So for the purposes of our discussion, it's important to understand the difference between enrichment and an enriched environment. So enrichment is something that you add to the snake's life, you add to their experiences, you add to their environment on a temporary and intermittent basis. And that's different than regular enclosure furnishings or regular things that you allow them to experience. That is environmental stimulation. So living in an enriched environment or an environment that is stimulating means that that environment is full of options and choices and things to do and to stimulate that animal to think and exercise and move around. But those things are always there. Those are always options that the animal has. So enrichment as an item or an activity is something new and novel that you would add to the snake's enclosure for a few days or a few hours or intermittently, and you switch those items out, because once it's not new to them anymore, it's no longer enrichment. But enrichment could also be a novel experience. So it could be doing a target training session, it could be taking them outside for a few minutes, it could be allowing them to experience a new environment. So enrichment is an item or an experience that's new and novel. And an enriched environment is one that's just environmentally complex all the time and giving them options all the time and every day.
Okay, and so that's good. That's a good distinction between something that a lot of people try and consider is making the cage and the enclosure as complex as possible for the snake. But what you're saying is that the enrichment itself comes because it's a novel or a new experience, yeah?
That's correct. So most organizations define enrichment as something that's added to the animal's experience that's new and novel.
And that's not unique to snakes, is it?
No, it's done with shelter animals, with zoo animals, and it's now becoming huge in like the pet animal world with dogs and cats, especially. So there's whole books now on how to enrich your dog's life and canine enrichment for your family dog. So it's something that initially stemmed from the zoo world, but has now grown, and it's been recently implemented with laboratory animals as well.
Okay, that's fascinating, and I know there's a lot we could talk about that too. But we'll stay on topic with snakes to keep it under time. But yeah, there's a lot, and you know, I am familiar with shelter environments, and I think the idea is it's very important. I'm glad we're studying it more. What are common ways people keep snakes without enrichment, and what can we suggest to fix that?
I can only speak to what I observe. And so what I observe either on people's YouTube channels or other video platforms or on Facebook or photos they share with me in other ways is that sometimes people will have a snake in a glass terrarium or tank or a PVC enclosure, whether it's big or small, but there's nothing in it. The space is empty. There's the snake and a water dish and maybe one or two hides. And that is what would be considered a barren environment. It doesn't offer behavioral choices or environmental complexity. And I also observe this in people that keep snakes in tubs or in drawers, like a rack system, is sometimes what I see, and not always, because you can also give complexity to those environments. But most of the time, what I see is a water dish and the snake, and then substrate or something on the bottom, like paper or some type of substrate. And so that isn't offering the snake any options or choices to make in their environment. So that would be like me putting you in a room that had a toilet area and a water source and maybe a place to sleep. And that's all you really need to survive. You don't
like
need
a prison cell.
You know, exactly. And then I just leave you there and I feed you every now and then. Mm-hmm. So that would be a barren environment versus one that's enriched or stimulating. And you may hear other words used depending on the scientific research that you read or the article that you read. Different people titled that type of environment in different ways. It is sometimes called standard. It's sometimes called barren or deprived or impoverished or a non-enriched environment. So you could see any of those terms in literature, but what it means is something that has what the animal needs to survive at the bare minimum: water, shelter, maybe a toilet area, sometimes a hide.
And so that's like what I would describe seeing on a lot of YouTube channels, particularly with ball python breeders, but a lot of colubrid breeders as well in the smaller species, where it's just, you see behind them and it's a row of racks and tubs and they slide it out and like, look at this animal, look at this animal. And it's just maybe, coconut husk bedding, maybe just paper. And so that would be what you consider a barren environment. What is what's the harm in that? Is there a harm in that? Is there any quantitative value that we could say why we don't want something like that?
Yeah, so there can be potential harms in that. And so I guess the first one I want to mention is a lack of exercise. So the animal isn't getting sufficient exercise in an environment like that because nothing is stimulating them to move. So I'm a snake sitting here. I can sit here, or I can move to get a drink. I mean, that's not a lot of incentive to move around. And so you may see animals that aren't fit or aren't as physically fit as they could be if they were moving around more and using their muscles and all of the things that they evolved to do with those muscles. You're also going to see a lack of mental fitness. And what I mean by that is they're not using their cognitive abilities. Their brain isn't being stimulated. And so they're just there. They might just be shut down or a lump, and they're not really doing anything. And the behavior that you're seeing is out of habit. And habit is involved with a whole different area of the brain than cognition and problem solving and goal-directed behavior is. So snakes can learn things initially and then start doing them out of habit. And that is what you'll see a lot of times with the feeding responses and accidental feeding bites, is if you always open the tub, feed the snake, open the tub, feed the snake. At first, the snake learned, okay, when I hear these noises outside, I smell these scents, and the drawer opens and the person's there, food comes. And so they get ready. And at first, that's a goal-directed behavior. I know food's coming, I'm going to get ready. But after a while, it's habit. And they do it without thinking. Drawer opens, food, drawer opens, food, drawer opens, food. And one time the drawer opens and you go to change the water and you get bitten because they weren't thinking. It was just drawer opens, food. And so they're striking out of habit. So that is one of the detriments to keeping that way. And then if you have a snake that has an innate need to express their physical energy in physical ways, or they have a brain that's working overtime, they're going to find ways to expend that energy. They're going to find things to do to occupy their mind. And that's where you might see maladaptive behavior. or stereotypies. You might see nose rubbing, face pushing, edging, which is where they just frantically go around and rub on or push on all of the surfaces. You might see pacing in front of where they know the door to the enclosure opens or where the tub opens. You might see them pacing. So you could see stereotypies or maladaptive behavior that could be even harmful for them. You may see the other side of the spectrum where instead of becoming hyper reactive or hyperactive, they just shut down and they don't do anything and they just sit there. And sometimes they'll even go off food and not want to eat or drink enough. And that, of course, can have medical consequences.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a, I want to circle back to what you mentioned earlier between enrichment compared to an enriched environment, because you were talking about, the physical exercise of the snake, and I thought, well, that sounds good. That sounds like that would be something that an enriched environment would take care of, but maybe enrichment is going to help more towards the mental fitness, or is it 6 of 1? Is some work is towards one way and one works the other way, or is?
If you have an enclosure or a tub that's environmentally complex, that is going to definitely help with the physical exercise because the snake now has options. I can sit in my hide. I can sit on top of my hide. I can go climb on that PVC that someone hung in here. I could go to this hide that's made out of a different material. I can go sit on this box that someone put in here. I can squeeze in this paper towel roll that someone put in here. Oh, I could go drink this water, or I could go sit in this humid hide. Now they've got all of these different options, and that's going to make them or encourage them to move between those different locations. But after a while, that's all going to become habit too. I wake up, I like to sit on this hide because it's warm in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I like to move over and get a drink. And then I like to go sit in my humid hide. And then in the evening, I like to get on my little PVC perch and get an ambush position. So all of those things are physical exercise, but those can become habit if you aren't intermixing enrichment activities into your snake's life. And so you could add enrichment to that same environment by changing out some of those items every few days. Now, you always want to leave some items the same because you want your snake to have those foundation items that make them feel safe and comfortable and familiar. So you want to leave a portion of the environment the same because you want them to feel secure. But you can make an environmentally complex tub or PVC enclosure or glass terrarium enriched by adding a novel item every so often, because that will stimulate the brain. Oh, wow, what's that? Now there's something new in my environment. Let me go see what that is. You want to make sure it's something they're not afraid of. And also you don't want to put it in a place where it could interfere with them accessing resources, because you don't know when you initially introduce an item if they're going to be afraid of it, curious about it, neutral about it. So you don't want to put it between them and their water or something. You want to make sure it's off to the side. So if they want to interact with it, they can, but they don't have to access their normal resources.
Okay. And that's another one of the, it's not your specific tenant, but you're the one I see promoting it the most with snakes. And it's been promoted for a long time with mammals and other pets that we have is just choice-based handling, right? So you're not telling the snake that if they want to get to the water, they have to go over this new object that scares them. They have a choice, right?
Right. And I really wish a few years ago when Reptiligence started talking about choice-based handling and I started talking about it, we used the word choice-based interactions, because really that's what it is. It's not
You're
always
right.
handling.
I said handling and there's no touching whatsoever. I didn't even realize that it came out of my mouth. Yeah,
but
thank you.
We can construe handling as management and the way that we work with the animal. So it's fine, but really a more proper word would probably be choice-based interactions. And those choice-based interactions include interactions with us, interactions with their environment, interactions with their enclosure, interactions with anything that is around them.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I know we could that's another topic that is just this the tip of the iceberg kind of question. So thank you for going on that little tangent with me. I appreciate that. Back to your paper. In it, you wrote that one of the lines that I think I liked the most, because it's my ethos with keeping snakes, is I want to recreate the wild as best as possible. But that is a impossible task. I'm not going to create the Amazon rainforest for my rainbow boas. I'm not going to recreate the San Gabriel Mountains for my rosy boa. Like, it's just not going to happen. But so you had a line that said, great. You said they are not in a natural environment, so we shouldn't limit ideas for environmental stimulation to only those activities an animal would do in the wild. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Yes, of course. So we are keeping them under captive management. So the snakes didn't choose to come and live in our houses with us. They didn't come and choose to live in our zoos and choose to live in a box or whatever we're keeping them in. I mean, on the spectrum of force-based versus choice-based interactions, at the very most minimal level, we are all exercising a form of force on our snakes because we are forcing them to live with us in captivity. Mm-hmm. And so under those circumstances, you're right, they're no longer in their natural environment. And we, with the exception of maybe some wildlife parks and zoos, can't replicate that to a huge extent. We can replicate some of that. And that is great. And we should be doing that in order to give them an outlet for those species typical behaviors, those behaviors that have evolved for that animal to do. But we also expect that animal, and they really have to adapt to living under captive management where they won't thrive. If the animal can't adapt to living in captivity, they aren't going to thrive. They're not going to be healthy mentally or physically. And so we give them maybe a plastic water dish. We're not giving them a pond to drink out of. And so when we're thinking about enrichment, we shouldn't limit it to, well, I can't put a log in there or a tree in there, so I'm not going to put anything in there for them to climb on. You can use PVC. I mean, PVC is something they're not going to encounter in the wild. Mm-hmm. They're not going to encounter plastic or metal or manufactured wood in the wild unless they happen to come upon something somebody's thrown out as trash. But they are going to encounter those things under captive management. If they're in a tub or an enclosure they can see out of, they are going to see these things in their environment. And if they come out or we put these things in, they're going to interact with them. And so we shouldn't limit ourselves to think, well, I can't provide enrichment or I can't provide environmental stimulation or exercise because I can't give them a river or a pond or a rock or things that they're going to encounter in nature. They're going to encounter things under captive management they're never going to see in the wild. And we can work with that not only in the way that we manage them and keep them, but the way that we enrich their lives. As long as it's safe for them and something that they can express an innate behavior using, there's no reason not to give it to them.
Right on. Yeah, there was it reminds me, there was a very popular series, the Snake Discovery Enclosure build-off. I think a lot of folks that watch Snake YouTube are familiar with that one. The person who ended up winning was Garrett Hartle of Reach Out Reptiles, and there was a lot of beautiful caves and landscapes, and Garrett made a barn, and I love that because some people go out looking for snakes, right? You know, there's plenty of herpers, but for the most part in our daily lives when we encounter snakes, they're in a neighborhood, they're in someone's house, they're in a barn, they snuck up under, they're in a car. I saw a video of someone driving with a gopher snake on the window the other day. So it's like, yeah, you know, this isn't their natural environment, but that's just as real to snakes as some others. So I liked that because it kind of got me out of my funk of trying to say like, oh, I specifically want naturalistic stuff. It's like, well, that would be great, but it's weird because it's PVC. So now I try and blend as much as I can and whatever I can with them.
I really like trying to blend natural stuff with manufactured stuff. That's what's easiest for me to do here with the large number of snakes that I have. Mm-hmm. And it also looks cool. And it also makes there's no two enclosures here that are identical. I only had that when I was doing a specific study of 10 individuals. Their enclosures were identical. But the ones that I have now, like each one is a little bit different because I just throw random stuff in there that I think that they will use. And it's very interesting to see what the snakes decide are their favorite items. And they're not always what I think are going to be their favorite things.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing too, is just observing your snake to see what they're into, I guess, right? How much of that plays into it?
A lot. So I observe the snakes when they first get here, usually in a simple enclosure, and then I gradually add things or I gradually allow them to experience things and I judge how they react. And through the years of experience, now that kind of helps me judge what type of enclosure might be best for them and what things they might like in it. But then sometimes I just put stuff in it and try it and see if they use it or not. And sometimes I'm surprised that they will choose a manufactured item over a naturalistic item. And then some snakes are the opposite. I have a jungle carpet python that just was so fearful of natural substrate and natural rock caves. She liked her PVC perch. She liked her plastic tub. You know, that made her feel comfortable. That's what she preferred. She liked her paper towel bedding. She was afraid to touch natural substrate. I have other snakes that are the opposite, that if I give them the choice of a plastic hide or like a log or a rock hide, they're going to go for the log or the rock one. And I just try to offer them as many options as possible so they can make those choices for themselves. And it's the same with people. I like a very hard surface to sleep on. I sleep just fine actually on the floor. I've gone to visit people who give me a really soft, cushy, squishy mattress, and I'm like, I can't even sleep on this. Like, give me a cot, give me the floor. I can't sleep on this. And so somebody else might be totally different. We all have our different preferences, and the animals are the same and the snakes are the same.
So that's a good question. So that led me into some of my was saying, you know, snakes and other reptiles, right? They don't have the facial expressions that we're used to seeing. Like, we can tell we're pretty good. Some of us need more help than others, but we're pretty good at reading the expressions of a dog or a cat, knowing if they're afraid or happy at least. But what signs would a snake show that either they don't have enough enrichment or they need it, or that they're enjoying it?
One of the things that you can look at, and this is a real subtle sign, is you may think the snake is content or comfortable and relaxed because they're just sitting there, but they may need enrichment if they're not expressing any innate behaviors. I mean, if they're not moving around at all, if they're not eating, for example, like they've just gone off food, or they're not drinking, they're becoming dehydrated. If you see that they're not doing even those simple behaviors that they should be doing, that could be a sign that they need, that could be a sign of a medical issue, but it also could be a sign that they need more mental and physical stimulation in order to get them going and to help them feel more satisfied with their environment. You can also see the opposite. So you could see hyperactivity or hyperreactivity, where they're reactive to everything. They're hyper about everything. That's where you'll see stereotypies develop, like pacing, like nose rubbing, like edging. If you're seeing those behaviors, those are maladaptive, and they're usually repetitive behaviors that seem purposeless to us, but there's a purpose for the snake. They're trying to cope with an environment that isn't allowing them an outlet to express an innate evolved behavior. And so instead, they're trying to find other things to do with that energy, whether that's mental energy or physical energy. So if you're seeing those abnormal behaviors on one end of the spectrum or the other, that's usually a sign something needs to change. Check them out medically, and if everything's okay, then start offering them activities, experiences, enrichment, and see if things change.
That's interesting to me, because you mentioned, you know, if a snake shows signs like not feeding, and I'm always trying to, I'm on Facebook a lot. I try and talk to a lot of people and help people out. And probably the most common question on snake Facebook is, why won't my snake eat? I've heard, you know, it always starts with husbandry, which is, I think, great. Check the husbandry. And then there's all kinds of techniques. Have you tried live? Did you wiggle it? Did you put a little cut in the head? Did you soak it? Did you dry it? Did you heat it with a blow dryer? But I've never, ever, ever heard anyone say, well, how enriching is your snake's life? You think that might play a role in it?
It may play a role in that they're just so, what we, in layman's terms, bored, that they're just so like pessimistic, that they're just so, you know, okay, I'm here, this is not fun for me, that they're not interested in eating. So when people become depressed, it's depression, and animals experience depression. It's a neurological state of the mind and body. So it's an actual physiological response to conditions. So when organisms become depressed, some may overeat and go that hyperactivity route, but others may not eat. I don't want to eat. I don't want to get up. I don't want to move. I don't want to do anything. And that certainly can be a factor. Now, I also think that sometimes snakes don't eat because we are trying to feed them too much. Like, stop trying to feed them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they will show you behavioral signs when they are seriously hungry. They get into ambush positions and do different things out of habit. But when they're truly hungry and, man, I feel that hunger and I need to eat, you're going to see them be more reactive to movement. You're going to see them awake longer. You're going to see them moving to more locations because they're trying to optimize their opportunities to find food. But if they're just coming out of their hide every night and getting into an ambush position or sticking their head out of their hide, that's habit. That's not, I'm so hungry, I need to go look for food. And I think people try to feed them too much and the snake's just like, stop, I don't want to eat.
Yeah, so that's another thing. I can't say it enough how much I get from your YouTube channel, just the benefits of the thing, because you just had a video recently talking about the digestion of your snake that has had the surgery. So instead of getting those rest periods between meals, it has to eat basically every 3 to 7 days or 3 to 5. Yeah,
really frequently.
And it's right. That's an alarming sort of thought to know that her metabolism, her or him, I'm sorry.
Her, it's
her,
a female.
I thought so. That her metabolism is up so much. Because I think that's a great point. I think people feed snakes far too often too. But it's just being able to pay attention to them and watch what they're doing. It's such a valuable tool in your husbandry. I've always said that the most important tools to have would be like a hook and infrared thermometer to track the temperature and something to measure humidity, but also probably just some time to sit and spend with your snakes is probably the most valuable tool we can have as keepers.
You need to be able to observe their behavior, and also it's really important they can observe our behavior, and that's for several reasons. If they don't know what's normal behavior from us and they don't learn to recognize the historical antecedents that we do, the things we do behaviorally that mean I'm going to feed you versus I'm going to change your water versus I'm just walking around the room, then you're going to have some miscommunications. So the animals watch us and learn by watching us. And that's really important, that they can see out, that they have at least one place where if they choose to, they can see what's going on and learn about their environment. And then if we can't see them, we don't know what's normal behavior for them. We don't know if they're exhibiting stereotypies or maladaptive behavior when we're asleep or when we're working during the day, but they're in a drawer that we can't see them in. And we don't know if they're experiencing pain or discomfort or distress if we can't see them.
That's interesting, but I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here. Aren't reptiles just instinctual animals? It really feels like there's a lot being made out about them, that you're making them out to be a lot smarter than a lot of people give them credit for. So where's the disconnect there?
There shouldn't be a disconnect. Snakes are vertebrates. And there are 3 things that I could point out right off the top of my head to demonstrate to you that their whole lives are not based on instinct, because they wouldn't have survived, 99 million years? Is that the oldest snake fossil we have, or 100 million years?
Yeah, I think it's 120 or 140. Goodness.
So they wouldn't have survived over 100 million years of geologic change, climate change, habitat change, other species coming and going in their environments if they weren't able to think and problem solve and learn. So instinctual behaviors are, I need to eat. Eating's an instinctual behavior, but the way in which I locate and acquire that prey and the way in which I handle it in management once I have it, that's not instinctual, that's learned. And staying away from danger and learning how to locate resources, that's all problem-solving behavior. So nature presents snakes with challenges that they have to overcome. And if they can't overcome those challenges, they don't survive to reproduce and live on. And those challenges require problem solving, and those challenges require thinking. And so if a snake gets picked up by a bird one time and they somehow survive, they struggle enough, the bird drops them, whatever, they learn from that experience that the consequence of getting too close to this bird was this happened, and I'm going to stay away from those things when I see them again. Or, hey, I was just cruising along and I found a food item here. I'm going to go back to that same location and look for food there again. So they are learning through experience in the wild. And if they weren't able to problem solve and learn, there's no way that they would be here. They wouldn't survive. So yes, instinct initiates some behaviors, but learning and experience makes those behaviors more efficient, and behavior has consequences. And so if a snake behaves in a certain way and it has a positive consequence, they're going to do that behavior again. If it has a negative consequence and they survive, they're not going to do that behavior again. And if they weren't able to learn that, they wouldn't still be here. The second thing is that we can look at them under captive management, and they're learning all the time, even if you don't mean to be teaching them anything. If you always open the left side of the enclosure to feed them, they're going to learn over time that when my handler comes to the left side of the enclosure and opens this door, food comes. But as I mentioned before, we want to be careful because that can turn into habit. And if you do that enough, then they just think food's coming no matter what comes in that door. But then we can also train them that, okay, when I open the left door, food's coming. When I open the right door, I'm going to change your water. I'm going to get you out. I'm going to do this. When you see this target, it means that food is coming. When you see this target, it means you have an opportunity to come out. They learn things all the time under captive management. And that's just on a very classical level, that associative learning where they associate something with something else. But on an operant level, they're learning all the time here that now if I interact with this target in a specific way, if I position on this scale in a certain way, then food will come, then I'll get reinforced. And they can even learn to discriminate that this cue means I'll get reinforced with freedom. This cue means I will get reinforced with food. So I wouldn't see those behaviors and get those behaviors, those trained behaviors from the snake if they weren't able to learn and grow. I mean, following a target to position on a scale is not instinctual. Right. That's not instinct in any way, shape, or form. That's operant learning. And then the third thing that I'll throw out there is that neuroscience, neurobiology has taught us that snakes and other reptiles have the same or homologous parts in their brain and the rest of their central nervous system as all other vertebrates do. They're not somehow all vertebrates have these things, but snakes don't. And so what I mean by the same is exactly the same, or homologous means that they have portions in their brain or their nervous system that perform the same functions as a part of our brain. So the neocortex in our brain is sort of the higher functioning part of our brain that helps us problem solve and think through things. And in birds and reptiles, they have something called a dorsal ventricular ridge, and that is what they think is homologous to our neocortex in mammals. So not only do we see in the wild and under captive management that they can learn and grow and do behaviors that aren't just solely instinctual, neuroscience tells us they have the brains to problem solve, to utilize cognitive skills and abilities in order to survive and learn and grow.
And so that sounds like they have the ability in their brains to process unique thoughts, problem solving, creativity. I guess that would be part of it.
Yeah, that's part of problem solving. And you'll see that in a lot of colubrids. So maybe a baby bull snake is just cruising along following a scent trail because the smell of food is going to be something that's innate to them to know, hey, that smells like something I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. So they follow it to a location and maybe they find some little mice running around outside of it and they eat. But then the next time the mice aren't running around outside, they're inside a burrow or something. And now the snake's got to learn how to get in there and get to them. And now maybe the next time they're actually trying to get away from the snake and the snake's got to figure out how to outsmart them and catch them. That's all operant learning. So that all started with an instinct to eat because I'm hungry, but then along the way they learned how to make that whole process more efficient and how to hunt and how to problem solve now, not just how to find where the rodents are, the general area, but how to get to them and how to capture them and how to outsmart them. And we can manufacture that through puzzle feeding and foraging exercises under captive management. And you don't want to throw that at your gopher snake or your corn snake, like, I'm going to put this in a locked box, figure out how to get in it. No, you want to start really easy. Like you put the rodent outside of a box and they find it. And then the next time you put it inside the box, but you leave the box open and then they find it. And next time you close the box a little bit and they learn that if they push their body against the lid, it opens in and they can get in, and you make it progressively harder because that's what would honestly be happening in the wild. And as long as they're successful, they're going to keep on living and finding food and shelter and staying away from danger in the wild. But if they make a mistake and mess up, it might be fatal. If they make a mistake and mess up in our puzzle feeding, it's not going to be fatal. So
hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully.
You back to the paper, you had listed a few different types of enrichment. So physical enrichment, cognitive enrichment, sensory enrichment, social enrichment, and food as enrichment. So explain to me what those are, especially I wanted to talk to about the last one. So maybe we'll start there. How is food enriching other than the obvious?
So it's called dietary enrichment or food enrichment, depending on what organization you're looking at. And it really maybe should be, and it's because it involves diet or food, but it really is a food acquisition task that you're giving them. So instead of just putting the food in front of their face, they eat it and they're done. That's like me spoon feeding you, and maybe you would enjoy that. I don't know, but that would be pretty boring after a while. If you just
after a while, it's a little much.
Spoon fed you the same meal every time that you needed to eat. One day you might be like, you know what, I don't even want that. I don't even want to eat today. So food acquisition exercises are things that get the snake's hunting behavior stimulated. Okay, I can smell food. I wonder where that's at. And now they have to look for the source of that scent, follow a scent trail, find the food, figure out how to get to the food. So now you've got physical exercise happening, mental stimulation happening, problem solving happening, and it's prolonging the feeding process. So if I just feed the snake, they eat it, they're done, that might be 30 seconds, a minute. But now if they're having to go through this food acquisition exercise in order to finally get to and eat the food, you might have extended that feeding period for a very long time. And these snakes are in captivity 24/7. So we can feed them in 1 or 2 minutes and then they can go back to sitting again, or we can extend their feeding time over 1 or 2 hours of their day. And then they feel satisfied, they feel full, they're probably tired mentally and physically. They're going to go rest out of a need and not out of, well, I'm bored again now, I guess I'll just sit here.
Right, interesting. It brings me to a thought about a podcast, and I'm trying to think if he was hosting or if he was a guest. But Dr. Zach Loafman was talking about the biology of rattlesnakes. It must have been a guest because his podcast is all about colubrids, and they had studied that when they get the scent, through their tongue. So I guess not scent, but once they pick up on that olfactory sensory of the rodent, their metabolism kickstarts. It jumps up, but not only that, it activates their digestive juices. It activates their the gut flora and fauna, the bacteria inside the gut really activates and kicks into high gear. And so if we do the same thing, we run the risk of them, if I'm interpreting this correctly, we run the risk of them getting bored even with food. And for a cold-blooded animal, that excitement factor is super important to get them going. So I wonder if maybe that's a way of helping picky eaters too.
Absolutely. I've had picky eaters come to me from somewhere else, or you can tell that they've always just been given food. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they'll eat, sometimes they won't. They don't understand that they even have to move to get to the food. But I always make feeding harder and harder for them every time. I give them some leeway when they first arrive, especially if I know they've lived in a tub where someone's just fed them. But I expect them to offer me some kind of behavior in order to tell me I'm hungry and I'm willing to work for food, because that's what they would have to do in nature. They're challenged in nature to find and locate and acquire that food and then handle it once they have it. And so I try to simulate that as much as I can under captive management and make it an activity and not just I'm giving you food. And so they get mentally stimulated. All of their organs have to grow. I went over that in that video that I did about the snake digestion. In pythons even too, like tissues grow, protein synthesis increases, heart rate increases, stroke volume increases. All these things have to get initialized in order for them to handle that food once it's in the system. And that all starts when they start that active hunting and they're looking for the food. That metabolism's getting geared up. The heart rate's getting geared up as they're moving around hunting. And so by the time they get to that prey item, they've they've worked at it so much that they're so excited to eat it, that it's also how I introduce novel prey items. I've had snakes arrive here that were supposedly stuck on a certain kind of prey, but after several feedings where I've done a foraging exercise or a targeting activity, they now know, oh my gosh, that target means that if I do something, I move across this log, I engage with the target, I'm going to get fed. And by the time you present the food, they're not even thinking about what the food is. They're just like, I'm ready for that food, and they snatch it. I really don't have snakes here, and I have over 100. I really don't have snakes here that don't eat. When I watch for them to be ready to eat. I watch for behavior that tells me I'm truly hungry, not just doing this out of habit. And I'm actively hunting, and I'm actively doing behaviors to increase my opportunities to find food. And then I offer food and they eat it. It just doesn't get wasted here.
So then that's interesting to me. So it's with me, it's easy. I have 5 snakes. So just the other night I fed 4 of them, because one of them is he doesn't eat a lot of food. So the other 4 though, it was time to feed them all, and I fed them all. And some of them were acting hungry. Some of them I kind of just, they came out once they smelled the prey. Excuse me for that. Sorry. Once they smelled the prey. But you have so many snakes, and if you're feeding on sort of as they dictate, are you feeding snakes every night?
Mostly. Yeah. My husband mentions, he says, you told me snakes are so easy and they don't take a lot of time to take care of, but you're always feeding them every night. I'm like, I'm not feeding the same snake every night. I'm feeding different ones. And sometimes I'll feed a snake right next to another snake that's not eating that night, and they do sometimes take notice. Sometimes they don't, because they've learned, the more experienced ones, that, hey, if she's not here working with me, then I know that I'm not the one getting fed. But I have other ones that will watch, that will come to the door and watch as I'm feeding the other snakes. And they absolutely know when they're the focus of the learning, because they recognize my behavior. They recognize what the target means. They recognize what I'm asking of them. And so they know that that's their turn to eat. And they also know, after they've been here a while and have learned this, how to tell me, hey, I'm really hungry. Can you feed me tonight? And it's going to be some really obvious, overt behaviors that they do. And I'll usually watch for them 2 or 3 nights in a row. And then I'm like, yeah, you're ready to eat. You're hungry. I'll feed you.
Interesting. And I love what you said about the multiple prey items too, because when they're engaged, very, very, very few species in the wild only eat one type of animal. There's some that will primarily focus on a specific toad, some that might just get a specific lizard, especially as a baby. But for the most part, the snakes that are in captivity are generalists, right? So that was amazing to me that I'd heard that when I was coming up in herpetoculture is, you could try chicks and you could try quail, but be careful, they might switch and only take that. And I thought that was wild. But so sounds to me like, if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, is that a snake that is getting food, sort of an enriched life, and is getting the feeding as an enriching experience, that you haven't experienced any issues with animals getting stuck on one particular type of prey.
I haven't. Now, just like people and dogs and other animals, there may be a type of prey they just don't like. So my jungle carpet python doesn't like rats. Like, she just doesn't like them. She'll take it and be like, bleh, and she'll spit it out. But she eats mice, she eats quail, she eats chicks, she eats other things. She just doesn't like rats. And so that's one of the things that I take note of as I'm trying different food items. But many of my snakes eat reptilinks, chicks, quail, rats, fish, mice. I have some that haven't refused anything I've offered them. And then I have others that you can tell, well, they'll eat rats, quail, and mice, but they don't like fish. I mean, some of them don't like fish. That's not part of every snake's natural diet. So some of them are like, ugh, what's that? Yeah. Not eating it. And that's another way that you can also enrich their lives, is giving them these different food options. And by interacting with them, you're giving them choices as to what they like and don't like. You're figuring that out. And so then I can tell you, oh, I know this snake likes these 2 food items. This one will eat anything. This one likes these 3 different food items. This one doesn't like rats, but will eat everything else. And then you offer them a variety. And I think that has to help with their nutrition as well, and their gut microbiome, which is a whole nother topic.
Sure. Yeah. And I want to point out, thank you to Andy for commenting. He had said a little while ago that a good point on the ambush position being a habit. I notice behavior change when they are really hungry. And also Paul, he liked the insight that the important tool is time to observe them. And Paul, that's just why I like talking to Lori, because she helps me figure things out. What about wait, here's one that I'm a little confused on. So sensory enrichment, I get that's sights and smells. That's just putting something new around or having new stuff in the house. Um, Physical enrichment, I think we talked about that with physical activity and getting them to move around. But what would social enrichment be, especially for a snake?
So social enrichment for a snake is going to be very species dependent. So for snakes that eat other snakes, even sometimes they're conspecifics, you're obviously not going to give them any free contact time with other snakes outside of probably if you're breeding them, because they may eat the other one. That would still be enriching for one of them, probably, but
Sure.
not for the other
Absolutely.
one. So you don't want to do that, obviously. A snake, like a garter snake, they're very social. In fact, they do better under captive management if you have a little colony going, because they interact socially. That's not even really, I don't think, debatable anymore. There's been enough studies done on garter snakes and rattlesnakes that we know they live communally. They help each other take care of their little baby snakes. They are social. They form social relationships where they will choose to spend time with the same snakes over and over again. So you have snakes on both ends of this spectrum, where you have a few species that literally are very social. And then you have some that are like, if we're not breeding, I'll eat you and don't come near me. And then you've got this middle ground, which is a lot of the snakes I have, like the carpet pythons, the Brettles pythons, the corn snakes. They're interested in other snakes. Like if they're out roaming, they'll go to the other snakes' enclosures if they're empty, and they'll explore in them. They may come upon another snake if I've got more than one out at once, and they will acknowledge each other. They might sniff each other, but then usually they just go their separate ways. But because they're not interacting highly socially like we would see horses do or dogs do, it doesn't mean that that's still not social enrichment. So just visually seeing another snake or another animal can be social enrichment. Anytime you're interacting with another living thing, that is social interaction. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be neutral, but you're still interacting with something else. We want it to be good, or at minimum neutral, for our snakes, because we don't want them to be harmed. So it's okay to let them see other snakes, let them see other animals, as long as neither of those animals is exhibiting fear, anxiety, or distress, or is in danger. I've had more than two snakes out at the same time, and they've encountered each other and decided to lay together in the same spot, or get an ambush position together in the same spot. And then I have others that completely ignore each other or acknowledge each other briefly and go their own ways. But that's still social enrichment, because it's mental stimulation. It's something that they're doing that they wouldn't have been doing if they didn't have that opportunity. So anything that stimulates their behavior, stimulates the brain, stimulates them to behave in some way, is enriching.
Okay. That's good. That is really good to know, because that's something I often wonder about too, is what the social life is for a lot of these animals. If there's any, if it's beneficial or not. Lorraine has a question, and she asked, do you have any advice for interacting with nocturnal species that never come out except at night? And so I'd asked her if she meant during the day or night. She said during the day. So any advice for interacting in the daytime with a nocturnal species that never comes out except at night?
So I work weird hours because I try to accommodate the snake's natural time when they're awake and active. So I'm generally up till 4 or 5 in the morning, and I sleep till about 11:30 in the morning. And so that way I'm interacting with my daytime snakes and my nighttime snakes, because I don't want somebody waking me up when I would normally be asleep and asking me to go for a run or asking me to go bowling or do an activity. I wouldn't appreciate that very much at all. And so I don't think that our animals appreciate that. Unless it's an emergency, I try to leave them alone unless they're naturally awake and active. Now, with that said, I understand not everybody wants to stay up at night to work with their snakes. So you can try to modify that behavior, but you're going to have to meet them halfway. You're going to have to work with them a little bit. So if they normally are awake and active, let's just say at midnight, and I just pulled that out of my head, and you go to bed at 10 o'clock, try to stay up till midnight one night, interact with them in some way that's got positive emotional valence for them. Either that's when you feed them, that's when you let them out, that's when you put the enrichment item in, that's when you change their water. Some snakes really like fresh water. And then the next night, so you do that a few nights in a row so they know that that's become your habit, that at midnight, when I wake up, she's here to offer me this thing I like. So then after a little while, you maybe do it at 11:45 and then 11:30. And you start kind of training the snake to wake up a little earlier for you until they're waking up at an hour that's more reasonable for you. But you're still going to have to try to meet them in the middle a little bit. You can't expect a snake that would be in the deepest part of their rest period at noon to get up at noon every day. I mean, that would not be, I think that's rude. So you can get them to modify their rest behavior that might accommodate you better by going through this process of shaping an earlier wake up time, or shaping them to stay up in the morning a little later and not go to bed so early. But you're going to have to also modify your schedule so that you guys can find a time that works for both of you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Lorraine, I hope that's helpful. If you have any follow-up to that, let me know. Lori, and let me get back to asking you. So we're coming up on the end of it. Let me ask you, what does this mean for us as keepers? So how we apply this, especially if we don't have a lot of time or money. And what I'll do, I'll change that a little bit. So I'll make it kind of like a, not necessarily a rapid fire, but you just tell me real quick. I'll give you a type of enclosure, and you can tell me like some ways of enriching it. So if let
me say one thing first.
Yeah,
that sounds fun, but as a keeper, you have to have the desire to put your snake's welfare first. So you wouldn't even be doing any of this if you don't care, if you don't give it care how your snake thinks or feels, or if they're getting exercise or any kind of stimulation. So you have to be a keeper that desires this for your animal, that desires to optimize welfare. And welfare science tells us that welfare and well-being are not the same thing. Welfare is just taking away negatives and making sure the snake's not in pain, is not suffering, has the things they need to survive: food, water, thermal regulation. But well-being means that you're going above and beyond that, and you're actually giving them things to thrive, and you're providing for that animal things that are going to give them positive emotional valence. So back to our prison cell, you can live in a prison cell with a toilet area, water, and a bed, and someone feeding you every so often. But do you really have positive well-being if that is your whole life 24/7? To have positive well-being, look around your house right now, wherever everybody is. What do you have around you that is there strictly not for your survival, but for your positive emotional well-being? And so if you're a keeper that wants to offer that for your snake, there are simple and complex ways to do that, and everything in between. And I think that if we're going to keep an animal in captive management, we're forcing them to stay with us in captivity. We should be doing absolutely everything we possibly are able to do to optimize their well-being.
That's good. That's good. Elisa asks, any recommendations for scent-related sensory enrichment for safe non-food scenting?
Oh, yeah, I actually have. So, this is a good time to mention this. I have an enrichment playlist on my YouTube channel. And I actually just reviewed that before, in preparation for this, to make sure it was all still really relevant. And I was like, wow, I really did a good job on this. It's all still really relevant. So some of the videos are from 2 years ago on up to the present. And I think I have them listed in the order that I think would be great to watch, which one's a general video. And then I have 5 separate videos on the different categories of enrichment, and they're a little bit longer. So I actually show examples and go over all these options. And there is one about scent and different scents that snakes may or may not like and what's safe for them. But just as one example, you could take a toilet tissue roll or paper towel roll and put a drop of fruity smelling oil on it. And that can be enriching for your snake. If that's something that you've noticed your snake is like, I have a few snakes that are really attracted to spending time around fruit and fruity smells. And so I can drop a drop of a fruit smell or smear a banana on a paper towel roll and throw it in the enclosure. And they spend like a really long time interacting with it.
Yeah, thank you. That's good. And I'll link in the when I upload this on YouTube, I'll link your page and that playlist to it, 'cause that's good. So excellent. Thank you. That's very fitting. Okay, so let me ask you. So, and another thing too, at least that I was thinking of, so long as your snakes have been checked and make sure they're healthy, you want to do this because biosecurity is of course important. But you could even put the shed skins of one snake into the enclosure of another one, especially if it's if you're working with males and females in terms of getting them thinking there's competitors around or a potential mate. Sometimes that's beneficial during the breeding season. I know that's been a popular sort of technique as well.
That's a really good point. I've been shocked with, if I've got more than one snake out, how much I find them. Like I'll lose them. I'll be like, oh my gosh, I've lost the snake. I can't find them. And they're in the other snake's enclosure. Tongue flicking, moving around the objects in the enclosure. It's like, I just let you out. Why are you going in each other's enclosures? And so that has to be, that's what they're choosing to do. So there has to be something to that.
And do you find they usually go into similar species? Like does a bredli go into a bredli's enclosure, or will sometimes it doesn't matter? They'll go into the open one?
My bredli Borath, if TC's not in TC's enclosure, which is my super dwarf reticulated python, the first place he goes when he gets out of his enclosure is into TC's enclosure. And there have been nights when I've had to take him out because I need to put TC away. And I'm like, and now I've put TC in Borath's enclosure thinking, fine, Borath doesn't want to come out of your enclosure. You can go in his for the night. And TC's like, no way, let me out of here. I don't want this. So you absolutely have to observe. Like, I don't force that. It's something they do on their own. But that night that I thought, well, I'll just put TC in this Brettles enclosure for the night. TC was like, no, I don't want to be in here. He was like, I want out. But that Brettles goes into TC's enclosure every single time he comes out if TC's not in it.
Interesting. Got a friend. So that's really interesting stuff. That's again the fun stuff that we get when we get to observe our snakes and our pets. And for those looking, they could see you have a cat tree behind you. That's obviously enrichment for when they're outside.
Yeah.
And we could build stuff like that. I use, it doesn't have to be a cat tree. I use a step ladder because I could fold it up and put it away because I don't have a ton of space to work with. A milk crate, a basket on top of a TV stand. Sometimes I'll do that and set it up and let them climb on it.
You can turn bar stools upside down and tie stuff to the legs or put a net between the legs because they're pretty steady because this part you sit on is flat and then the snake can climb on the legs and all the stuff.
Yeah, right on. So let me ask for, you tell me, if I was new to enrichment altogether, I just thought and I said, wow, great lesson, Lori. Tell me more. I keep my corn snakes in a tub with paper and a water bowl. What else can I do? What can I do to help my snake enrichment?
Cardboard boxes, paper towel rolls, toilet tissue rolls, plastic containers, like empty peanut butter jars, empty butter dishes. You can cut holes in those things and give the snake things to climb through. You can scent those items to make them more interesting for the snake. You can affix items to the sides of the tub for texture. We didn't really talk about textural enrichment, or that's a form of sensory enrichment where you provide different textures for them to rub against and climb over and grip onto and feel. And then even in a very shallow tub, because some of my transport containers, if I'm taking them to the vet or picking one up, are pretty shallow tubs, but I still have a PVC pipe across it. And it's really low, but they still get around it, and sometimes they'll squish underneath it or they'll squish above it between it and the lid because that feels really good to them. So you can still implement those kinds of things. And if you just put a cardboard box in there, now not only can they get inside it, but they can climb on top of it and squish between, you know, the box and the lid, because they really like when they're resting. A lot of snakes like to, some rest out in the open, but I have many that like to flatten between two really close together things when they're resting.
Okay. And that sounds like stuff that can go into just about that kind of stuff, a paper towel roll, an empty cereal or like a granola bar box, rocks.
Like
those
a rock.
Like,
I mean, obviously one that the snake's not small enough to accidentally eat if for some reason they're confused, but a rock, some twigs, branches. You can vary the substrate or put a little dish in there with a different kind of substrate than their normal substrate. I mean, just anything. If it's safe for them to interact with, throw it in there and see if they interact with it.
Yeah.
If it's new and novel, it's going to stimulate some mental activity just because it's new and they're like, what is that? But again, make sure it's not keeping them from getting to resources in case they're afraid of it.
What about like in a bioactive environment? Like I just added 2 new plants into each one. I separated one that grew, and so I planted it twice. Would they find that sort of thing enrichment, that I changed the scape out a little bit?
Yeah, if you change the landscape, if you change the substrate depth, if you add more ledges and shelves or different rocks or move the rocks around, anything that's a change is going to stimulate them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's really interesting stuff to think about, and it makes me really question everything in terms of what I'm doing daily for my snakes, as opposed to, because it's like your husband said, you know, I'd always said snakes are easy, and that's why I like them is because if I need to go out of town for a week, I feel pretty safe that I give them fresh water before I go, and that's the end of it. But there's a lot more we certainly can be doing. That's the welfare part. They have their food, they have their water, they have the heat and humidity that they're going to need for the week. But did I take care of their well-being? I don't know. So it might be a good thing to leave something new in for a snake when you go out of town or something, like if you're not going to be seeing them all week or
right.
Or some, I don't know. But it
gives
me,
and keep in mind too that, I mean, I have over 100 here and I'm trying to do all this with them. So yes, it's taking up a massive amount of my time. But if you just have 1 or 2, it doesn't take up that much time to do these things. If you just target train them or puzzle feed them every time they eat, and that's every 2 or 3 weeks, that's not that much time. If you change out an enrichment item or 2 every few days, it doesn't take that much time to open the door and put a new item in there. So it takes me a lot of time because it's my job. It's what I'm pursuing now as a career as I continue with training and behavior. But if you just have a few snakes, it doesn't take that much time to do these things.
Right. No, I think it's amazing that you're able to do what you do with the number of snakes that you have. If someone told me that, you know, having not seen you or not known what you're working with, they told me what you did, I would have said, oh, okay, well, easy for her. You know, she's probably got what, 15 snakes? Like that sounds like a lot, but no, the fact that you do it with so many is amazing. And I think the results are there. You can see on your videos, just the demeanor of the animals that you deal with. There was a snake that you took to the hospital, the video that you shared, I'll put a link in that too, where you took it to the vet, you targeted him to stretch out completely so that he could receive it was an injection, and then you were able to target him back in, all without having to hold him and restrain him and really do all this. I can't tell you how many times I've been to the vet with a snake, either mine or another one, and because it's freaked out and because they have to work with it, they're holding it by the back of its head. Its mouth is deciding between open because it's trying to show you how scared and how angry it is, and it's just it's cringing. I hate it because that's my pet and he's really terrified out there. And I know it's going to take him a full 8 days to settle down when I get him home. And to see just the difference in behavior that you had from that animal that stretched fully out, received the treatment, went back where it was supposed to go, and was like, all right, that was Tuesday. You know, it probably got rewarded when it was done with everything too, right. Which is even more reinforcing that it was a great experience for it. I think
I tend to feed them at the vet, unless I will say some aren't up to that level. And if they need an emergency treatment or
Yeah.
they need treatment and they're not up to that level where they're trained and they're habituated, then we just have to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
if they need it medically, then we just have to do traditional restraint and do it. And in those cases, I don't pair that with any training, with any enrichment, with any food, because I don't want to poison those things. So if it's a matter of the snake's not up to this level of training yet and we have to force handling because of a medical issue, then we just do it. And we make sure to keep that completely separate from all of those other positive experiences we want the snake to have.
Right on. Lori, there's a lot there. And again, I think we're a tip of the iceberg sort of situation. So I know there'll be a chance for us to get back and chat on this channel again. I hope you'd be willing to come back at a later time to dive into those other topics. But thank you so much for joining. Thank you everyone else for watching. Was there anything else you wanted to get off, Lori?
No, I think you had some really good questions. You covered everything. You gave me an opportunity to expand on them. So I think that if we're just sticking to the topic of enrichment, that we did a good job. But if people have more questions, I'm really accessible via YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, email, and my website, and you can shoot me some questions. If you want office hours with me, one-on-one time, I have the Patreon. And some people have said they're not comfortable joining Patreon. You can now do the one-on-one coaching through YouTube memberships too. If you just prefer to do it that way, you can purchase a YouTube membership and we can meet monthly. So there's options out there.
Right on.
This is what I do for my career is animal training and behavior consulting. I've done it for over 30 years with dogs and horses. And now the last, 4 or 5 years, I've added snakes, and I'm really excited to offer this to the reptile community. I'm just so psyched and excited to work with the snakes in this way. It's reinvigorated my passion for animal training and behavior.
That's awesome. And it shows. It's great to have someone like you advocating for snakes, because it's not out there a lot. So thank you for that. And for those of you who watch this, so Andy, thank you. Brianna, thank you. We got a lot of thank yous here. So Andy said, thank you so much. We're going to get more info. Lori just said it. I'm not on a lot of Patreon. I cut back cable. I cut back a bunch of things. I cut back a lot. One of the channels I still subscribe to is yours, Lori, because frankly, I learned something from you every video that you put out, and you get to have the live chats, which there's one today, right?
Yeah, tonight.
So we get to continue this again later. But I can't recommend the Patreon enough. I pay $5 a month. It's not a ton of money compared to a lot of other stuff. Put the $5 down, join Lori's Patreon. It's worth it. Do the one-on-one consultations on the meetings on YouTube. It's absolutely worth it. So thank you again. I'll put links in the YouTube to all of that, and I'll see you later.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks everyone for watching.